Welcome to the Secret Lives channel.
Harrison Sterling walked into the grand ballroom of his family's Greenwich estate like a king returning from conquest, his hand firmly gripping the waist of a woman who was definitely not his wife. He thought the ink on the divorce papers gave him the right to parade his 23-year-old mistress, Brittany, in front of the very woman who built his empire. The guests gasped. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. But Harrison didn't care. He had the mansion, the money, and the girl. He just forgot one thing. The name on the deed didn't belong to him. And when his mother, the iron-willed Margaret Sterling, tapped her glass for a toast, Harrison's smirk was about to be wiped off his face forever. The invitation had been clear. The Sterling family annual charity gala. For 15 years, Catherine Sterling had been the architect of this event. She had hand-selected the lilies that adorned the centerpieces, curated the guest list of Manhattan's elite, and practically laid the marble floors of the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, herself, metaphorically, and in some renovations, financially. But tonight, Catherine stood by the raw bar, swirling her sparkling water, feeling like a ghost in her own life. Technically, she wasn't a Sterling anymore. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. It was a brutal, jagged separation that had dominated the tabloids for months. Tech mogul Harrison Sterling dumps wife of 15 years for yoga influencer, the headlines had screamed. It was a cliché, so tired it barely deserved a gasp, yet it hurt Catherine with a fresh, sharp pain every time she looked in the mirror. She shouldn't have come. Her friends, Samantha and Joyce, had told her as much over wine 2 nights ago. "Kate, don't do it," Samantha had warned, her eyes full of pity. "He's going to be there, and she might be there. It's masochism." "It's not masochism, Sam. It's dignity," Catherine had argued, though her voice had wavered. "I am still on the board of the foundation. If I don't show up, it looks like I'm hiding. It looks like I'm the guilty party." Now, standing in the shadow of the grand staircase, Catherine regretted her bravado. The mansion, a sprawling Georgian estate with manicured lawns that rolled down to a private lake, felt hostile tonight. The air was thick with whispers. Every time she turned, she caught the side eye of a banker's wife or a tech investor, their gazes darting away the moment she made eye contact. "You look stunning, by the way," a voice said beside her. Catherine forced a smile and turned to see David Thorne, the family's long-time attorney, and one of the few people who hadn't treated her like a contagious disease since the split. "Thanks, David. This vintage Dior feels a bit like armor tonight," she admitted, smoothing the silk of her midnight blue gown. "You need armor in a snake pit," David murmured, taking a sip of his scotch. He looked tense. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the room. "Has he arrived?" "Not yet." Catherine checked her watch. It was 8:15 p.m. Fashionably late. It's his new thing. Harrison never cared about being fashionably anything until he met Brittany. Brittany. The name tasted like ash. Brittany Vane was 23, a wellness coach on Instagram with 3 million followers and a penchant for posting photos from the deck of the yacht Catherine had spent 5 years saving to buy. "Catherine," David said, his voice dropping an octave. "I tried to tell Harrison this was a bad idea. Bringing her here, tonight, it's against protocol, it's against decency." "Decency left the building when he served me divorce papers on my birthday, David," Catherine replied dryly. Suddenly, the ambient chatter in the room died down. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was a sudden, sharp silence that rippled from the foyer through the double doors and into the ballroom. It was the sound of 300 people holding their breath at once. Catherine's stomach dropped. She turned toward the entrance. The double mahogany doors were flung wide open. Flashes from the hired photographers popped like strobe lights. Harrison Sterling stepped in. At 45, he was still handsome in a jagged, aggressive way, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. He had the air of a man who believed the world was a buffet laid out specifically for his appetite. But no one was looking at Harrison. All eyes were glued to the woman on his arm. Brittany was wearing a dress that left almost nothing to the imagination. A sheer, sparkling gold number that looked less like evening wear and more like a figure skating costume. It was loud, it was tacky, and on her finger, sparkling under the chandelier lights, was a diamond the size of a quail egg. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. That wasn't just any diamond. That was the sterling blue, a family heirloom. Harrison's grandmother's ring. "Oh my God," Samantha whispered, appearing at Catherine's elbow. Did he give her the blue?" "He did," Catherine whispered, her hands shaking so hard she had to set her glass down on a passing waiter's tray. "He gave her the ring he swore was in the safe deposit box for our daughter's 18th birthday." Harrison scanned the room, a smug grin plastered on his face. When his eyes landed on Catherine, the grin widened. It wasn't a smile of greeting. It was a smile of conquest. He pulled Brittany closer, whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. A shrill, piercing sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Showtime," Harrison seemed to mouth. He began to walk through the crowd, parting the sea of guests like a perverse Moses. He wasn't just attending the party, he was marking his territory. He was showing everyone that out with the old, in with the new, was the new law of the Sterling land. Catherine wanted to run. She wanted to bolt through the kitchen doors, jump into her car, and drive until the gas ran out. But her feet were lead. She was frozen, watching the man she had loved for 15 years parade his mistress around the home they had built together, wearing the ring meant for their child. "Stay calm," David whispered beside her. "Do not let him see you bleed." But it was too late. Harrison was heading straight for her. The distance between the raw bar and the center of the ballroom was perhaps 30 feet, but Harrison made it feel like a runway walk. He stopped every few steps to shake a hand or clap a shoulder, but his momentum was undeniably directed at Catherine. Brittany clung to his bicep with a possessive grip, her eyes darting around the room, soaking in the attention. She didn't seem to notice the horrified stares or the whispered judgments. To her, this was just another red carpet, another piece of content for her feed. When they finally reached Catherine, the circle of silence around them was almost suffocating. Guests pretended to look at their phones or sip their drinks, but every ear was tuned to their frequency. "Catherine," Harrison said, his voice booming. He sounded jovial, which made it worse. "I didn't think you'd actually come. Brave of you." Catherine straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of finishing school poise she possessed. "It's a charity event for the Children's Hospital, Harrison. I'm on the board. Unlike some, I don't treat this night as a photo op." Harrison chuckled, shaking his head. "Always so serious. That was always your problem, Kate. You never knew how to just let go." He gestured to Brittany. "You remember Brittany, don't you?" Brittany stepped forward, popping a hip. She looked Catherine up and down with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Hi, Catherine. Great to see you. I love that dress. Very vintage. It hides your figure really well." The insult was wrapped in sugar, but it hit like a slap. Samantha, standing behind Catherine, audibly gasped. Catherine smiled, a tight, razor-thin expression. "Hello, Brittany. You look expensive." I see you're wearing the sterling blue." Brittany held up her hand, wiggling her fingers so the diamond caught the light. "Isn't it gorgeous? Harrison surprised me with it last night. He said a ring this beautiful deserves a hand that's actually young enough to show it off." The cruelty of the comment made David Thorne step forward. "Harrison, this is inappropriate. That ring is part of the estate trust for Lily. You have no legal right to gift it." Harrison turned his cold eyes to the lawyer. "Back off, David. I'm the executor of the trust. I can do what I want. Besides, Lily is 12. She doesn't need jewelry. She needs a father who is happy. And Brittany makes me happy." "By stealing your daughter's inheritance?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "It's not stealing if it's family," Brittany chimed in, linking her arm through Harrison's. "And I'm going to be family soon. Harrison and I are getting married in the spring. Right here, in the garden." The bombshell dropped in the middle of the conversation like a grenade. Married. In the spring. In this house. Catherine felt the room spin. "You're getting married. The ink on our divorce papers isn't even dry. Why wait when you know it's real love?" Harrison smirked. "And yes, we're doing it here. It's the Sterling estate after all. It's fitting. We're going to renovate the east wing first, though. Brittany thinks the decor is a bit dated. Too much old money, dusty vibes. We want something modern. Minimalist." "You can't renovate the east wing," Catherine said automatically. "The murals in the library are historic." "I can do whatever I want, Kate." Harrison leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, audible only to her and the immediate circle. "I won. I have the house. I have the company. I have the future. You? You're just a guest. And honestly, looking at you standing there, clutching that water like a lifeline. You look pathetic." He pulled back, his mask of joviality returning. "Anyway, enjoy the shrimp. We have rounds to make. Come on, babe." He turned his back on her. Brittany cast one last smirk over her shoulder, a look of pure triumph, before trotting after him. Catherine stood there, trembling. The humiliation was total. He had stripped her of her home, her dignity, and now he was erasing her legacy, redecorating her life with his mistress. "I need to leave," Catherine whispered to Samantha. I can't do this." "No," a stern voice cut through the air. Catherine turned. It wasn't Samantha. Standing near the entrance to the kitchen, leaning on a cane made of polished ebony, was a figure that commanded even more fear in the Sterling family than Harrison. It was Margaret Sterling, Harrison's mother. She was 78 years old, frail in body but terrifying in spirit. She wore a black velvet gown and a single strand of pearls. Her grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Margaret had not spoken to Catherine since the divorce began. Catherine assumed the matriarch had sided with her son. After all, Harrison was the golden boy, the one who took the family business to billions. Margaret hobbled over, her cane clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. She stopped in front of Catherine. Her eyes, the same icy blue as Harrison's, bored into Catherine's face. "Margaret," Catherine breathed. I was just going." "You are going nowhere," Margaret said, her voice raspy but firm. "I can't stay here and watch him humiliate me," Catherine pleaded, tears finally pricking her eyes. "He's engaged. He gave her the blue ring. He's going to renovate the house." Margaret looked toward the center of the room, where Harrison was currently laughing loudly while Brittany took a selfie with the senator. The old woman's expression was unreadable. "Harrison has always been a fool for a pretty face," Margaret said, almost to herself. "But I did not think he was a fool with his assets." She turned back to Catherine. "You stood by him for 15 years. You nursed him when he had that breakdown in '09. You raised my granddaughter when he was too busy chasing IPOs. You renovated this house with your own bare hands. It doesn't matter now. Catherine wiped a tear. He owns it all. Margaret's lips curled into a very small, very dangerous smile. Does he? She reached into her small beaded clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old, yellowed at the edges. David. Margaret summoned the lawyer without looking at him. David stepped up immediately. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. Is the microphone set up for the toasts? Yes, ma'am, in about 10 minutes. Good, Margaret nodded. She looked at Catherine. Fix your face, Catherine. Put on some lipstick. Stand up straight. Why? Catherine asked, confused. Because, Margaret said, tightening her grip on her cane, the show is about to start, and my son has forgotten who actually wrote the script. Margaret began to move toward the stage, slowly but with the inexorable force of a glacier. David, come with me. I have some legal clarifications to make regarding tonight's festivities. Catherine watched her mother-in-law walk away. For the first time all night, the crushing weight in her chest lightened, replaced by a spark of curiosity, and perhaps hope. What was that about? Samantha whispered. Catherine looked at the retreating figure of the matriarch. I don't know. But Margaret never does anything without a reason, and she never, ever loses. Across the room, Harrison was lifting a glass of champagne, toasting to himself in a mirror, unaware that the ground beneath his feet was about to open up. The orchestra struck up a lively waltz, but the atmosphere in the room remained brittle. Harrison Sterling, seemingly oblivious to the tension he had manufactured, was in his element. He moved through the crowd with Brittany attached to his side like a decorative barnacle, accepting hollow congratulations and forcing laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes. Catherine remained near the back, flanked by Samantha and David Thorne. She watched her ex-husband ascend the small stage set up at the head of the room. He tapped the microphone, the high-pitched feedback screeching through the speakers and silencing the few remaining conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. If I could have your attention for a moment. He beamed, looking out over the sea of faces. The elite of Connecticut, the sharks of Wall Street, the people Catherine had spent 15 years cultivating relationships with. Tonight is about charity, of course, Harrison continued, swirling his scotch. But it is also about new beginnings. As many of you know, this year has been transitional for me. A few nervous coughs rippled through the crowd. Transitional was a polite word for scandalous. But, Harrison went on, tightening his grip on Brittany's waist, pulling her into the spotlight, sometimes you have to burn the dead wood to let the new forest grow. Catherine felt the air leave her lungs. Dead wood. That's what she was to him. 15 years of marriage, raising his child, managing his home, supporting his career, all reduced to dead wood to be burned. I am thrilled to announce, Harrison shouted, his ego swelling with every word, that Brittany and I are officially engaged. A smattering of polite, terrified applause broke out. Most people were too shocked to clap, glancing nervously back at Catherine. And, Harrison shouted over the tepid response, we aren't just celebrating an engagement. We are celebrating a new era for the Sterling estate. Brittany has agreed to take on the massive project of modernizing this old museum. He swept his hand around the room. No more dreary antiques. No more dusty history. We are turning this place into a sanctuary for the future, a home fit for a modern dynasty. Brittany leaned into the mic, her voice high and breathless. I'm thinking lots of glass, open concepts, and getting rid of that creepy rose garden in the back. It's just so depressing. The rose garden. Catherine's sanctuary, the place where she had buried her favorite golden retriever, the place where she and Harrison had renewed their vows 5 years ago. Harrison laughed. "You heard the boss. The bulldozers come next month. So, drink up, enjoy the old house while it lasts, and raise a glass to the future Mrs. Sterling." He raised his glass high. "To Brittany," a few of his sycophantic junior executives shouted from the back. Harrison took a long drink, looking directly at Catherine across the expanse of the room. His eyes said, "I win." But the glass never left his lips before a sound cut through the air. It wasn't a clap. It wasn't a cheer. It was the rhythmic thud-click of a heavy cane striking the wooden floorboards of the stage stairs. Harrison lowered his glass, annoyed. He looked down to see his mother, Margaret Sterling, slowly ascending the stairs. The room went deathly silent. Margaret was not a woman who made impromptu speeches. "Mother?" Harrison asked, his voice losing some of its boom. "We're in the middle of a toast." "I know," Margaret said. She reached the podium. She didn't look at Harrison. She didn't look at Brittany. She looked out at the crowd, her face a mask of stone. "I would like to add a few words to this celebration." Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe later, Mother. The band is about to—" "Now, Harrison," she said. It wasn't a shout, but the authority in her tone cracked like a whip. Harrison stepped back, yielding the microphone. He whispered to Brittany, "Don't worry, she's just going to ramble about family tradition. Just smile." Margaret adjusted the microphone stand. She was short, but in that moment, she seemed 10 feet tall. She looked at the guests, her eyes sweeping over the faces of people she had known for decades. "My son speaks of dead wood," Margaret began, her voice amplified and crystal clear. "He speaks of burning the past to build the future. It is a poetic sentiment. But poetry, unlike real estate law, does not require a signature." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Harrison frowned. "Harrison," Margaret turned slowly to face him. "You have announced 2 things tonight. An engagement and a renovation. Let us address them in order." She pointed a withered finger at Brittany's hand. "First, the ring." Brittany instinctively covered the diamond with her other hand. "The sterling blue," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "A 12-carat flawless blue diamond. My husband, God rest his soul, bought that in Antwerp in 1964. It was left in the family vault." "It's my inheritance, Mother," Harrison snapped, stepping forward. "I have the right to give it to my fiancé." "Actually," Margaret reached into her clutch and pulled out the yellowed paper she had shown David earlier. "You don't." She unfolded the document. "This is the addendum to your father's will. Clause 4, Section B. The sterling blue is to be passed solely to a female descendant of the Sterling bloodline upon her 25th birthday, or to the spouse of a male heir, provided that marriage has lasted more than 10 years. The crowd gasped. "Catherine earned that ring," Margaret said, her voice rising. "She wore it for 5 years. When you divorced her, she returned it to the vault out of respect for this family, a concept you seem to be unfamiliar with. Brittany, however," Margaret looked the young influencer up and down, "you have been dating my son for 4 months. You are not a blood descendant, and you are certainly not a 10-year spouse." "So what?" Harrison scoffed, though sweat was starting to bead on his forehead. "It's a technicality. I'm the executor." "David," Margaret called out. David Thorne stepped up to the edge of the stage, holding a thick manila folder. "Actually, Harrison," the lawyer said, his voice projecting well, "you were removed as executor of the distinct Jewelry and Heirloom Trust 6 months ago when you used company funds to purchase a Ferrari. Margaret is the sole executor. Which means, Margaret said, turning her icy gaze back to Brittany, that you are currently in possession of stolen property. You have 5 minutes to return it to Mr. Thorne, or I will have the police, who are currently providing security at the gate, escort you out in handcuffs. Brittany's face went pale. She looked at Harrison. Harrison, is she serious? She's bluffing, Harrison hissed, though he looked terrified. Mother, don't do this here. I am not bluffing, Margaret said calmly. Clock is ticking, dear. Brittany frantically struggled to pull the ring off. Her knuckle was swollen from the heat and the tightness of the band. She yanked it, wincing, and finally popped it off. She practically threw it at David Thorne, who caught it with a grim satisfaction. Good, Margaret said. Now, let us discuss the house. Harrison was fuming. The humiliation of the ring was bad enough, but he could buy Brittany another ring. He was a billionaire on paper. He could buy 10 rings. Fine, Harrison spat, adjusting his tie. You made your point, Mother. You care about the old rocks. Keep them. But this house is mine, and I am renovating it. Are you? Margaret asked. She leaned on the podium, looking almost bored. Yes, I bought out Catherine's share in the settlement, Harrison yelled, losing his cool. I own 100% of the marital assets. You own 100% of the marital assets, Margaret corrected him. That is true, but you seem to have a foggy memory regarding the history of this estate, Harrison. Perhaps because you were too busy partying in Ibiza during the closing of the original transfer. She signaled David again. He pulled a second document from the folder. This one looked like a deed, stamped with official seals. This estate, Margaret said, her voice booming, was never a marital asset. Harrison froze. What are you talking about? Dad left it to me. Your father left the company to you, Margaret corrected. The estate, the deed to the Greenwich mansion, was transferred in 2008. Transferred to who? Harrison demanded. I've been paying the property taxes for 15 years. You've been paying the taxes because you lived here, Margaret said. Consider it rent. But the deed was transferred into a specialized living trust. A trust controlled by you? Harrison laughed nervously. So what? You're my mother. When you pass, it comes to me anyway. No, Margaret said softly. It doesn't. She picked up the document David had placed on the podium. In 2008, after Catherine nursed you back to health following your nervous breakdown, when you were bankrupt, broken, and uninsurable, I transferred the ownership of this house into the Catherine Sterling Protection Trust. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Catherine, standing in the back, gasped. She grabbed Samantha's arm to steady herself. She had no idea. What? Harrison whispered. That's impossible. It is a revocable trust, Margaret explained, enjoying every syllable. With a specific clause. The house was to remain available for the use of Harrison and Catherine Sterling as long as they remained married. However, in the event of a divorce initiated by Harrison Sterling for reasons of infidelity or abandonment. Margaret paused for effect. She looked directly at Brittany, then back to Harrison. The trust dissolves, and the title of the property transfers immediately and irrevocably to the injured party. Margaret pointed a finger straight at Catherine in the back of the room. This house, Margaret declared, does not belong to me. It does not belong to the Sterling Family Trust, and it certainly does not belong to you, Harrison. This house belongs to Catherine. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, and shocked laughter filled the air. Harrison looked like he had been hit by a truck. He staggered back, nearly tripping over Brittany's train. No, he stammered. "No, that's not legal. You can't just... I put millions into this place." "You put millions into Catherine's house," Margaret said with a shark-like smile. "How generous of you." "I'll sue," Harrison screamed, his face turning a violent shade of red. "I'll sue you. I'll sue the trust. I'll burn this place to the ground." "David," Margaret said calmly. David stepped to the microphone. "Mr. Sterling, the deed was recorded 3 weeks ago, the day the divorce was finalized. Catherine is the legal owner of this property, and as her attorney, which she has just retained me to be, I have prepared an eviction notice." David held up a red envelope. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises," David said. "Personal effects only. No furniture, no art, and certainly no fixtures." Harrison looked around wildly. The guests were no longer looking at him with fear or respect. They were looking at him with pity and amusement. He was a clown in a tuxedo. He turned to Brittany, looking for support. "Babe, tell them this is insane." But Brittany wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the red envelope in David's hand. She was looking at the ring that was no longer on her finger, and she was doing the math. "Wait," Brittany said, her voice sharp. "So, he doesn't own the mansion? He doesn't even own the chair he's standing next to," Margaret said helpfully. Brittany took a step back from Harrison. The realization hit Brittany Vane faster than it hit Harrison. She was an influencer. Her entire life was built on optics and asset management. She had latched on to Harrison because he was the king of Greenwich. But a king without a castle, and with a mother who controlled the purse strings, was just a middle-aged man with baggage. "You told me you owned everything," Brittany accused, turning on Harrison. The sweetness was gone from her voice, replaced by the screech of a woman who realized she'd bet on the wrong horse. "I do, I will." Harrison grabbed her arm. "Don't listen to the old hag. I have the company. Sterling Tech is worth billions. I can buy 5 houses like this." "About that," Margaret interrupted again. She was relentless tonight. She was enjoying this. Harrison spun around, veins bulging in his neck. "What? What else could you possibly take from me? I built that company. I am the CEO." "You are the CEO," Margaret agreed. "At the pleasure of the board of directors. I control the board." "You used to," Margaret corrected. "Until this morning." Harrison went still. "What did you do?" "You see," Margaret explained to the captivated audience, "the bylaws of Sterling Tech have a morality clause for the CEO. It's rarely invoked. But parade a mistress around the annual charity gala while dragging the family name through the mud in the tabloids? That tends to spook investors." "I am the majority shareholder," Harrison roared. "No," David Thorne interjected, checking his notes. "You own 40%, your mother owns 20%, and Catherine—" Harrison's head snapped toward the back of the room where Catherine stood. "Catherine was awarded 15% of the voting stock in the divorce settlement," David said. "You thought it was non-voting stock, Harrison. You didn't read the fine print on page 400 of the settlement your previous lawyer, who I believe was an intern, drafted." Harrison looked at Catherine. For the first time, he really saw her. She wasn't the broken wife anymore. She was the woman holding the gun. "Catherine," Harrison pleaded, his voice cracking. "Kate, you wouldn't. You don't know anything about running a tech firm." Catherine slowly walked forward. The crowd parted for her, this time with genuine respect. She walked all the way to the base of the stage. She looked up at her ex-husband, then at his mother. Margaret nodded at her. "Finish him." "I don't need to know how to run it, Harrison," Catherine said, her voice steady and loud enough to be heard without a microphone. "I just need to know who I trust to run it." She turned to David. "I proxy my votes to Margaret Sterling. That gives Margaret 35%, David calculated. Plus the board's 15% confidence vote, that's 50%, a controlling interest. Harrison, Margaret said, her voice final. The board met in emergency session at 7 Saturday p.m. tonight. You are removed as CEO, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation into your misuse of company funds for personal travel. She glanced at Brittany. Harrison stood there, stripped naked in front of everyone he wanted to impress. No house, no ring, no job, no majority control. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then, a laugh broke it. It was Brittany. She wasn't laughing with him. She was laughing at the absurdity of it. She pulled her arm out of Harrison's grip with a violent jerk. "You are broke!" she shrieked. "Basically, I still have millions," Harrison argued, desperate. "I have my savings." "You have alimony payments," David reminded him, "and child support, and legal fees." Brittany looked at Harrison with pure disgust. "You lied to me. You said you were the god of this town. I am. I can fix this. Brittany, baby, we can go to the penthouse in the city." "The penthouse is in the company's name," David noted. "Company housing. You'll have to vacate that too." Brittany looked around the room, realizing her social standing was evaporating by the second. She made a calculation. "I'm out," she said. "What?" Harrison blinked. "I'm out," she repeated loudly. "I'm not marrying a loser who lives in a hotel, and I'm certainly not sticking around to be sued." She turned to Catherine. "He told me you were crazy. He told me you were mean. He lied about everything." "I'm sure he did," Catherine said coolly. "Goodbye, Brittany." Brittany didn't hesitate. She hiked up her gold dress and marched down the stage stairs, pushing past a stunned Harrison, and stormed out of the ballroom. The clicking of her heels faded into the distance. Harrison stood alone on the stage. The king was alone. He looked at the crowd, 300 people staring. Some were taking photos. Some were whispering. He looked at his mother. Margaret looked back with zero sympathy. He looked at Catherine, and then the rage took over. "You planned this," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Catherine. "You two witches! You conspired against me!" He lunged off the stage, heading toward Catherine with fists clenched. "You think you can take my life? I made you! Before he could get within 5 feet of her, 2 large men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows. Private security. They intercepted Harrison effortlessly. One grabbed his left arm, the other his right. "Get your hands off me!" Harrison shouted, struggling. "This is my house! I am Harrison Sterling." "Mr. Sterling," the head of security said calmly, "we have been instructed by the owner of the property to remove a trespasser." They began to drag him toward the exit. Harrison kicked and screamed, his tuxedo jacket tearing at the shoulder. "Mother, tell them to stop! Catherine! Kate! You can't do this to me!" His screams echoed through the hall until the double doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off the noise abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Margaret Sterling tapped the microphone one last time. "I believe," she said, her voice calm as if she hadn't just executed her son socially and financially, "that the salad course is being served. Please, everyone, sit, eat, and let us thank Catherine for hosting us in her beautiful home." She raised her glass to Catherine. One by one, the guests raised their glasses. "To Catherine," a voice said. Then another. "To Catherine." Catherine stood there, trembling slightly as the room toasted her. She looked at Margaret, who gave her a rare, genuine wink, but the drama wasn't quite over. As the guests moved to their tables, buzzing with the scandal of the decade, Catherine felt a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't Samantha. It wasn't David. It was a man she hadn't seen in 20 years, a man who had been standing in the shadows the whole time. "That was quite a show, Kate." A deep, familiar voice said. Catherine turned around and dropped her glass. It was Julian. No, not Julian. It was Lucas. Lucas Vance. Her first love. The man Harrison had forced out of town when they were all in college. He was back, and he was smiling. For a moment, the world inside the Sterling mansion seemed to tilt on its axis. Catherine stared at the man standing before her. Lucas. The last time she had seen him, they were 22, weeping in a dorm room because Harrison Sterling, backed by his father's ruthless lawyers, had threatened to ruin Lucas's family business if he didn't leave Catherine alone. Lucas had left. He had chosen to save his family, and Catherine, heartbroken, had fallen into the safety of Harrison's arms. "Lucas," she whispered, the champagne glass shattering near her hem, unnoticed. "What are you doing here?" Lucas smiled, and the years melted away. He was older now, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and a jawline that had only gotten sharper with age. He wore a tuxedo that fit him better than Harrison's ever had. "I'm the new consultant for the board," Lucas said, his voice deep and warm. "Margaret hired me 6 months ago." Catherine whipped her head toward her mother-in-law. Margaret was seated at the head table, calmly buttering a roll, watching the scene with the satisfaction of a director watching the final act of a play. "You knew?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling. "Margaret, you knew Lucas was back?" Margaret paused, knife in hand. "Catherine, dear, who do you think found the discrepancies in Harrison's expense accounts? Who do you think tracked down the purchase of the diamond ring? Who do you think discovered that Harrison was planning to liquidate the education trust for Lily to fund his mistress's fashion line?" Catherine looked back at Lucas. "You did all that?" "I'm a forensic accountant now, Kate," Lucas said softly, "specializing in corporate restructuring and asset recovery. When Margaret called me and told me what Harrison was doing to you, to the company, to the family name, I didn't hesitate." "Why didn't you tell me?" Catherine asked, tears finally spilling over. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Because you had to stand on your own 2 feet first," Margaret interjected, her voice carrying over the din of the room. She stood up and walked over, her cane clicking. "If I had fought this battle for you, everyone in this room would have said, 'Oh, poor Catherine, rescued by her mother-in-law.' But tonight you stood there. You took the insults. You held your head high. And when the moment came, you didn't crumble. You won." Margaret placed a withered hand on Catherine's cheek. "I needed to know that the woman who will raise my granddaughter and run my foundation has steel in her spine. And tonight, you proved you are a true Sterling. More of a Sterling than my own son ever was." The guests, sensing the shift in power, began to swarm. It was a nauseating display of social pivoting. People who had ignored Catherine an hour ago were now lining up to congratulate her. "Catherine, darling, I always said you were the heart of this house," gushed Mrs. van der Hoven, a woman who had literally turned her back on Catherine when she arrived. "Kate, we must do lunch. The foundation needs your vision," shouted Mr. Galloway, a banker who had been golfing with Harrison the previous weekend. Catherine looked at them, the sharks in silk and tuxedos. She felt a wave of exhaustion. She didn't want their praise. She didn't want their fake loyalty. "Excuse me," Catherine said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "I need fresh air." She turned and walked toward the French doors that led to the terrace, leaving the sycophants in her wake. Lucas looked at Margaret. Margaret nodded. "Go," the old woman said. "She's had enough of the vipers for one night." Catherine stepped out into the cool night air. The terrace overlooked the sprawling gardens, now bathed in moonlight. The silence was a balm to her frayed nerves. She walked to the stone balustrade and gripped it, taking deep breaths, trying to steady her shaking hands. "It's a lot to take in," Lucas's voice came from behind her. Catherine didn't turn. "You could say that. In the span of 2 hours, I went from a discarded ex-wife to the owner of a mansion and a controlling shareholder of a billion-dollar company. And I found out my ex-mother-in-law and my ex-boyfriend have been plotting a coup behind my back." Lucas moved to stand beside her, leaning his elbows on the stone railing. "Not a coup, Kate. A rescue mission." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "Margaret reached out to me because she was dying." Catherine froze. She turned to look at him. "What?" "She has a condition," Lucas said quietly. "She's managing it, but she knows she doesn't have 10 years left. She was terrified. She saw Harrison spiraling, drinking, gambling, chasing women who only wanted his money. She knew if she died, Harrison would burn everything to the ground. The company, the house, Lily's future. She needed an heir. A real one." "Lily is the heir," Catherine whispered. "Lily is a child," Lucas corrected. "She needed a regent. Someone to hold the fort until Lily is ready. She chose you, Kate. She chose you years ago. She just waited until Harrison made a mistake big enough to trigger the clauses in the trust." "He made a big one tonight." Catherine let out a dry laugh. "He did," Lucas smiled, "but Margaret didn't predict one thing." "What?" "That seeing you again would make me realize I made the biggest mistake of my life 20 years ago." Catherine looked at him. The moonlight softened the lines on his face. He reached out and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm. "I ran away because I thought I was protecting you," Lucas said. "I thought I wasn't enough. I thought Harrison could give you the world." "He gave me a golden cage," Catherine said, "and then he tried to kick me out of it." "I know." Lucas squeezed her hand. "But the cage is open now, Kate. You have the keys. You have the power. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" Catherine looked out over the darkened estate, the rose garden, the lake, the horizon. For 15 years, her life had been defined by what Harrison wanted, what Harrison needed, what Harrison demanded. "I want," Catherine said slowly, testing the words, "to renovate the library, but not with glass and steel. I want to restore the murals," Lucas laughed. "A worthy project. And," Catherine continued, turning her hand so she was holding his, "I want to have a drink with an old friend without worrying about who is watching. That," Lucas grinned, "can be arranged." Suddenly, a commotion at the gate below drew their attention. Blue and red lights flashed against the high brick walls of the estate. A siren chirped. Catherine peered over the edge. "Is that Harrison?" Lucas nodded grimly. Down at the main gate, Harrison Sterling was screaming at a police officer. He was disheveled, his tie missing, his shirt unbuttoned. He was trying to climb the iron bars of the gate. "This is my house!" Harrison screamed, his voice carrying up the hill. "You can't keep me out! I am the king!" "Sir, step back or you will be tased," the officer shouted. "Tell my mother to come out here. Tell Catherine she's dead meat." Catherine watched as the officer finally lost patience. He spun Harrison around and slammed him against the hood of the patrol car. The King of Greenwich was handcuffed, read his rights, and shoved into the back seat like a common criminal. Catherine watched the police car drive away, its tail lights fading into the darkness. "Do you feel sorry for him?" Lucas asked. Catherine thought about it. She thought about the years of gaslighting, the infidelity, the way he had looked at her earlier that night, like she was trash to be swept away. "No," Catherine said softly. "I don't feel sorry. I feel Free. 6 months later. The morning sun filtered through the newly restored stained glass windows of the library, casting pools of coloured light onto the mahogany floor. Catherine sat at the massive oak desk that had once been Harrison's. It was now covered in blueprints for the new pediatric wing of the city hospital and financial reports from Sterling Tech. She signed the last document and capped her pen. The silence in the house was no longer heavy or hostile. It was peaceful. "Mum!" a voice echoed from the hallway. Lily, now 13 and thriving, ran into the room. She was wearing a soccer uniform and holding a permission slip. "Grandma says she can't sign this because technically you're the boss of me, not her." Catherine laughed, taking the slip. "Grandma is right. She's the boss of the board. I'm the boss of the house." Margaret Sterling sat in a wing-back chair by the fireplace, knitting a scarf that was surprisingly colourful. She looked healthier than she had in years. The stress of managing Harrison was gone, replaced by the joy of watching Catherine and Lily flourish. "Is Lucas coming for dinner?" Margaret asked, without looking up. "He is," Catherine said, signing the slip and handing it back to Lily. "He's bringing the final projections for the merger." "And wine, I hope," Margaret muttered. "The man has excellent taste in Pinot Noir." It had been a whirlwind 6 months. With Lucas's help, Catherine had stabilized Sterling Tech. They had ousted the bro-culture executives Harrison had hired and refocused the company on sustainable innovation. The stock price was up 40%. The media had dubbed Catherine the Iron Dove, gentle in appearance, unbreakable in business. As for Harrison, the fall had been absolute. After being arrested for trespassing and disorderly conduct, the tabloids had turned on him. The wellness influencer, Brittany Vane, had sold her story to a gossip magazine for 6 figures, detailing Harrison's financial recklessness and erratic behavior. She had painted herself as a victim of his lies, effectively destroying any chance Harrison had of social rehabilitation. Bankrupt, humiliated, and facing multiple lawsuits from creditors, Harrison had fled to a small rental apartment in New Jersey. The last Catherine heard, he was working as a consultant for a mid-tier car dealership, trying to convince people he used to be a billionaire. He sent letters occasionally, begging for money, blaming her for his misfortune. But Margaret burned them before they ever reached Catherine's desk. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Sterling, Mr. Mercer is here." "Send him in," Catherine said. Lucas walked in, carrying a briefcase and a bottle of wine. He looked at Catherine, and his eyes lit up in a way that still made her stomach flip. They weren't married. Catherine was enjoying her independence too much to rush into that again. But they were partners in every sense of the word. "Good news?" Catherine asked. "The best," Lucas said, setting the wine down. "The shareholders voted. The hostile takeover is blocked. The company is safe. And..." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a ring. A key. "A key?" Catherine asked. "To the lake house," Lucas smiled. "The one you said you always wanted to visit in Italy. I rented it for the summer. For you, me, Lily, and even Margaret, if she promises not to critique my driving." Margaret chuckled from her chair. "I make no promises." Catherine took the key. She looked around the library, her library. She looked at her daughter, who was happy and safe. She looked at Margaret, her fierce protector. And she looked at Lucas, her second chance. She had walked into that gala 6 months ago, expecting to witness the end of her life. Instead, she had walked into the beginning of it. Harrison Sterling had tried to show off his mistress and break his wife, but he had forgotten the most important rule of power. Never underestimate the woman who knows where the bodies are buried, and certainly never underestimate the mother who raised you. Catherine stood up and walked over to Lucas, kissing him on the cheek. "Open the wine," she said, smiling. "We have a lot to celebrate." The Sterling mansion, once a house of secrets and cold ambition, was finally a home. You've just heard the story of how a cheating billionaire lost everything to the two women he underestimated the most. It's a reminder that dignity is quiet, but karma is loud. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and second chances, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the good guys do win in the end. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a juicy drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.